Good afternoon and welcome to WARF Essential Topics series. My name is Laura Heisler and I'm Director of Programming for the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. And we are delighted to bring you this series from time to time on topics that are important to campus researchers and the broader community. And this semester, we're delighted to feature a three-part mini-series aimed specifically at emerging professionals in STEM fields and beyond to help them think about ways to leverage their skills development as they think about their careers. Before I turn things over to our moderator for the next session, for this session, I'd like to mention our next session coming up in this series, which will be on March 3rd, focused on careers in intellectual property in a range of different fields. And so you might want to mark your calendars for that. The third session in our mini series will be focused on making a difference and living your values through your career and social impact. And that is TBD in terms of a date. We're looking to hold that towards the end of March, so stay tuned. If you got an email for this session, you'll certainly hear from us as that one comes together in the next few days. So thank you so much. Before I introduce our moderator, I do want us to all collectively take a moment to acknowledge the land that UW-Madison and WARF reside on. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Tejope or Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state governments repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, UW-Madison and WARF respect the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Thank you for taking a moment to consider the impact of these events on our present day. And with that, I am delighted to introduce my colleague Beth Werner from WARF, who's going to be our moderator for today's session focused on communications, tricks, tools, and skills for researchers. Beth, it's all yours.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited for the opportunity to talk with you today and to lead the discussion, this panel discussion, around communicating science. My role at WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, is to be the Director of Life Science and Intellectual Property, and that means I get the great job of talking to researchers at UW-Madison and the Morgridge Institute of Research about their research. Figure out if there are aspects of their research that could be commercializable. And then I work with lawyers and business people to figure out how to craft intellectual property that has some commercial value. It's a great job. And one of the great things about it is the ability I've got, the opportunity to talk to a lot of people about a lot of different aspects of science. And so this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. And so I consider myself very fortunate to be asked to moderate this panel. How we're going to run this session is we've got three panelists today that are going to talk about their careers, their history, what their jobs kind of look like in the communication space. So these are three amazing women who have transformed their love of science into communication careers, which I think is pretty amazing. And so we'll run through each talk. They've got about 10 to 15 minutes to talk, give their story. And then at the end, we'll open it up to questions. It can be questions specific to the panelists. It can be general questions you as students or postdocs or researchers have about careers in science, things that aren't at the lab bench. And we'll run it that way, and I'll just kind of moderate the questions, and we'll go from there. So I wanted to take just a few minutes to introduce each of our panelists in the order that they will be speaking. The first is going to be Sally Younger, who is WARF's technology writer. And she's written for National Geographic, Popular Science, and the Saturday Evening Post, among other things. And she is a technical writer in that she has to convert science into the written word, which again is a pretty amazing skill set to have. So she'll start us off today. Once Sally's done, I'll have her turn it over to Nhi Lei, who will give a talk about her history and her story. She is the Accelerator Associate for WARF, and so Nhi has a PhD in material science and from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has spent her career in accelerators. And what accelerators are they are for-profit, or in the case of WARF, we have an accelerator group, and he is a part of that group, a nonprofit that works to translate science into commercializable technologies. And so Nhi spends a lot of time communicating science to the business community. And you have only a certain amount of time in front of these business leaders to be able to communicate really complex science. So again, certain skill sets that are pretty amazing to have, and she's going to share her story. The final panelist we have for today is Mariel Mohns, who is a communication specialist at the Morgridge Institute of Research. Now, her scientific background involves studying the immune system's responses to viruses. So how timely is that for scientific background these days? And she spends her time translating science into stories that lay people, business people, community leaders, they're all reading these scientific stories about the research that's going on at the Morgridge Institute, as well as she works on the social media aspect to it. So again, being able to communicate science in a very brief, efficient manner to large groups of people. That's going to be, I think, the overarching theme for today's panel. And I'm looking forward to hearing what the panelists have to talk to us about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sally to get off the formal presentation part of today's session.
Well, thank you very much, Beth. If I'm on mute, tell me, please. As Beth mentioned, I have the pleasure of being the technology writer at WARF. I have served in this role for 7 years. I currently divide my time at this work at WARF as well as Stanford University, which is an awesome opportunity to see the different writing cultures and marketing cultures in our two very complementary universities. So I'd like to share a little bit about my science writing journey with you, how I got into this field. I'd like to impart some tips and tricks that I've developed in my 10-year career. If I'm really lucky, I might even lure some of you into trying your hand at some science writing yourself. So I really get to set the stage for today. So it's very much my pleasure to be with you. So I'd like to begin by asking, so why are we here to get together on this Friday? No, it's not Friday. What day is it, Beth?
I believe Wednesday today, Sally, Wednesday.
But that illustrates my point, because we've for the last 13 months have been living in an extraordinary time in which it's the first time, I think, in any of our lifetimes that a science story has been front page news across the world. And I say a science story and you think, well, it's a human story. It's the coronavirus. It's a story of drama and tragedy and the race to find a cure. But at its heart, it really is a science story. And you have to ask yourself, so who are the people writing these stories that we depend upon for our knowledge about the evolving situation? And I'd like to inform you that some journalists certainly are just that. They're just journalists. Maybe they studied communications. Other people who are covering the story day to day are trained scientists turned journalists. And I think that's important to spend a moment considering, because from what I've heard, the journalists who have training in science already are versed in the primary sources, that as this pandemic evolves in real time, these journalists who have experience in research are following it in real time and are already familiar with those primary sources, publications, maybe even patent applications. And that gives them a real advantage. So when I give this talk to, and I did last week, to students who aren't trained scientists, I say what you need to do is immerse yourself in the primary source of the field, which is nature, science publications, and really get familiar with how those stories are structured, so you can learn in real time. But as scientists and trained researchers, you already have that advantage. So I want to take a moment, because we know that science writing is important to you in your careers. If you want to write effective publications or win grant proposals, it's essential that you become a competent writer. But I would also say that if you want to convey and impart the value of your work to the popular press, that's an entirely different set of skills that I encourage you to take any opportunity you can to practice. Now, writing for the public is not a new phenomenon, and I think it's interesting to reflect on, just briefly, that we've been writing science, for better or worse, for over 2,000 years. And on this slide, I have a few just examples over the centuries, from a heliocentric universe, Galileo writing in Italian, to Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in 1962, which launched our public knowledge of DDT and its effect on the environment, to The Origin of Species, of course, in the 19th century, which is considered a cornerstone of biology. Up to the present day, of course, we have trained science writers like Rebecca Skloot writing about HeLa cells. We have Pulitzer Prize-winning geographers like Jared Diamond. Love him or hate him, he's a very successful scientist turned science writer. And you'll also see I included a book called The Bell Curve in the bottom of the corner, and I include that because it's a very controversial book. It was written in 1994, and it's a bit of a warning that I have for you that book, of course, is widely criticized for purporting prejudice because it connects intelligence with our race and genetics. So that book is also a New York Times bestseller. But this is a warning to you that there are writers out there that if you don't get ahead of your story, someone else might who has a very different agenda. So it's one reason why I would say it's not only a great opportunity for you to write your story, but to be comfortable because others will do so if you don't in the absence. So a little bit about me and why I'm preaching to you today. Just a comment on what this slide is. This is actually from the control room of the USS Bowfin, which is a submarine in Pearl Harbor. If you ever have the opportunity to tour, I highly recommend it. But I think it's a good metaphor for technical writing because oftentimes when you enter into a topic or a discovery or talk to an inventor, it can feel very pressurized. It can feel like you're walking in a room filled with gauges and data that you don't understand or you're not trained to understand. And that's something I certainly experienced because I am not a trained scientist myself. I am proud to work with scientists. It's the great pleasure of my job. But I myself trained as a historian and philosopher of science at UW-Madison. And the reason that appealed to me was that I didn't have to specialize in any one science, but I could really sample all the different life science, physical science, astronomy to zoology. And that really appealed to me. So after college, well, it was during college, I was fortunate enough to develop clips, one of which was a story in which I interviewed many sources on campus about how campus would respond to a pandemic, which was prescient at the time, but it was 10 years ago. And Zoom wasn't, I don't think it was even invented then. So it wasn't even in our consciousness of how we would really live through a pandemic like this. But those clips allowed me to essentially sell my professional ability, and I landed 2 internships. One was with Popular Science magazine in New York City, and one was with National Geographic in Washington, D.C. And those, of course, are 2 iconic publications, and I learned so much working with the experienced editors there. When you work at a magazine, you might be assigned a story and have to turn it around within the day, if not the half hour. So that really pressurized situation. It's both exhilarating and can be very exhausting. So after those experiences, I did dabble in lab writing here at UW-Madison, but I very quickly joined WARF as a technical writer was the term then. So I'd like to give you a survey of just what that means in my day-to-day life at WARF. And when you think of technical writing, some things might come to your mind. You might think that's a one-page executive summary of a technology that we might share with industry to attract interest in the emerging technology. We certainly do a lot of that at WARF. But it's more than that. It's feature stories where we interview inventors and we try to craft and really pull out the personal element of their life's work. It's also press releases where the audience for our work is members of the media. Sometimes we do executive presentations, we do ads, we do video editing, and those are deliverables that you might not associate with traditional science or technical writing, but that's certainly a part of what we do every day at WARF to try to elevate the profile of our technology and our researchers. So, is there a secret sauce to good science writing? In all its various forms. And this image is taken from a landmark anatomical text from the 16th century. And I think it's a good metaphor for remembering that when you write science, whether it's to researchers or members of the public or to members of industry, there are a lot of people fascinated by your work that want to learn from your work. And as this illustration, I think, conveys in an almost humorous way, sometimes there's a carnival atmosphere of lots of attention on your work and excitement, and other times less so. But if you spend time meditating on who you're trying to communicate with, what message you're trying to get across, who they are and what their expectations are for your work, that is always the key piece to any form of science writing or messaging more broadly. So tools and tips, over the last decade or so, a lot of classes have proliferated across the nation, designed to teach scientists how to write better. And in my brief survey of them, they tend to kind of focus on the same concepts, which is, in a science publication, jargon and technical terms might be acceptable and important, and they certainly are. But if you're writing for a different audience, say for the popular media, it's essential that you consider your assumptions about those terms and that your audience certainly might not understand them. Passive voice versus active voice. Of course, we have very different expectations when we read a newspaper article versus a scientific publication. What versus why, and this can also be described as burying the lead, which we hear a lot. In a science publication, you might start with the what and the data, the results. But if you're writing for others' consumption, they want to know why this work is important. And sometimes that means taking a step back from your day-to-day work and really considering your work in the larger context of our society. And that can be summarized simply by, is the purpose of this story that you're writing or this piece explanatory, or is it narrative? Are you trying to get across facts or meaning? And none of these are obviously, depending on whatever and whoever you're writing for, this is a sliding scale, but these are always the tools and tips that you'll be taught in these courses. So beyond these simple 4 principles to live by, I would absolutely encourage anyone interested in developing more science writing skills to embrace all the opportunities you can. You have department newsletters, there are blogs, there are opportunities to intern. There are certainly opportunities to speak with us at WARF about how we might be able to offer a platform for your work. And I went a little fast, but I look forward to hearing from you, the viewers, during the Q&A. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Sally. Let's turn it over to Nee. She's going to be the next speaker of the panelists.
All right. Hi, everyone. So Sally gave you a couple of minutes, and I'm going to take it back. I hope that's okay. Thanks so much for having me today to talk about pitching. Again, my name is Nee Lee. I am a WARF Accelerator Associate, and today we're going to talk about pitching. So, when we think about pitching, we're always looking at, professional talks or presentations, or you're thinking about, preparing a presentation for a group of people. That's not at all what pitching means. On a fundamental level, pitching is about convincing the person that you're going to engage with, that you're worth engaging with, so they can keep engaging with you. So that's a mouthful. So I'm going to go and explain why pitching is about convincing someone that you're engaging with, why you're worth engaging, so they can keep engaging with you. Let me break this down by giving you an example. If you are at a job interview, that is essentially a pitch. You are communicating with a potential boss or hiring manager about why you would be a value add to their company. And all of that is for the primary purpose of convincing them that they should work with you and that you should be working with them. Now, if you're in the scientific field, here's a second example. If you are presenting during a lab meeting, or you're presenting one-on-one with your advisor, that's also a pitching opportunity. What you're doing there is your audience is either your advisor or your lab members. You're trying to communicate that you are knowledgeable about the research that you do in that lab, and that your scientific rigor is sound enough that they should want to continue to work with you and trust your scientific discoveries. So keep in mind, though, that all of that is centered around intentional communication. What is pitching not about? It is not specifically about any particular type of presentation. It's not about an email, a slide deck, a Zoom meeting, or really anything about that in those restraints. There's no constraint about a particular format that you can use pitching for. It's also not about a specific formal or informal setting. It's not about any particular type of audience. You can pitch to your colleague, your boss, your grandma, or your roommate who's really going quarantine crazy and has started bark talking to your dog. Really, you can pitch to anyone you want. Pitching is all about intentional communication to some type of audience, and the intention is to get your audience to want to keep engaging with you. Maybe it's about getting your dog to want to bark talk back. Who knows? So I will address this topic by talking about first why you should trust me when it comes to pitching, how I use it in my daily life, and how to get to where I am. And then I'll share some tips and tricks that can really help you be more effective as an intentional communicator. So first, let me go ahead and discuss a little bit about my background. I am a PhD, and now I work in venture capital. So I'm a PhD, recovering scientist, now VC. And I do venture capital. And what that means is I help researchers figure out how to get their research to the market so people can really benefit from their work. I do that through WARF. And then I also work for a family office that makes startup investments, and they're based out of Singapore. So how did I get from the point of PhD to venture capital? Well, in the second year of my PhD, I worked with my advisor to start a company that was using patented technologies for my thesis research. And that's when I started to really understand that I really, really like startups. After that, I worked at lots of different accelerators, as Beth mentioned. And during the last 3 years of my PhD, I did a crazy thing called juggling 2 full-time jobs, one of them being a PhD. Highly do not recommend that. But it was such a great experience because I got to continue to develop my science skill set. And I also got to work and mentor over 100 different types of startups, 100 different startups from lots of different walks of life. So, I worked with lipstick companies to natural deodorants to gene therapies. And then after I finished my PhD, I came to work with WARF. So now at WARF, I work on what's called the WARF Accelerator Program. It is a grant funding program designed to give money and support to researchers and their technologies to help that technology get to a point where somebody's ready to take it and either put it into a big company or a startup company and then bring it to market so that we can all benefit from taxpayer-funded research. So and then during that time at WARF, during my time at WARF, I met the investor who wanted to do more science heavy investing in science heavy companies. And so now I kind of do both, and they both are very complementary. So the question is, what does that have to do with pitching, and why am I even somebody who is even remotely qualified to talk to you about pitching? Well, pitching is my job. I am pitching to you right now. I'm pitching constantly to researchers, to investors, to large companies, to small companies. And I'm also using pitching to help me build all the opportunities I've had from the time I started my PhD all the way to where I am now. Let's take a step all the way back to that first time when I started understanding what startup was. When I got the patents from WARF, I was going from researcher to inventor. And that journey itself started with an invention disclosure report to WARF. A lot of us that do research, we never have to think about the patenting intellectual property of our research. I was lucky enough that I got that opportunity. So trying to convince WARF to patent my technology that I had invented in research was essentially a pitch. I was trying to talk to WARF to convince them that the science that I had done was valuable and sound enough, and that there was somebody out in the market interested enough in it that if WARF patented it, then they would somehow be able to recoup their money by investing their time and money into it. So in the initial form, the invention disclosure form, that's just a written version of a pitch that I said the exact same thing. I said, here's what I invented. Here's who's interested in it. Here's how you can make your money back and why you should patent it. And then we had a follow-up meeting, and that follow-up meeting was essentially me saying that in person, and everything that they asked, I tried to direct that conversation back to that way. So then after patenting, we worked with WARF to identify the opportunity to take this out of the lab, and that opportunity ended up being that we needed to go through a startup. So we applied to a program on campus, an accelerator program on campus called the Discovery 2 Product Igniter program. And that gave us funding and mentorship to help us start that company. That D2P application, also a pitch. That application was us pitching to D2P as to what we were working on, why the potential opportunity that we were pursuing in the market is going to be lucrative, and if they were to give us their time and money, we would be able to somehow help them make that money back and give them some build their reputation as a startup builder. So through D2P, we learned to go out and talk to customers and potential users, and those interviews, also a pitch. I was talking to industry, I was talking to potential customers, and I spent so much time trying to convince these people, whether it's through warm introductions or through email, to try to talk to me. So my intention there was I wanted to tell them more about us and what we were working in order to convince them to give me some of their time so that they would actually talk to me and give me some of their insight and advice. So we did a lot of that. And then afterwards, we went and pitched to investors. Also a pitch, trying to get them to convince them that what we were working on is good enough that if they gave us some money to really run with it, we could double, triple, quadruple their money back in no time at all. So after D2P, my advisor asked me if I wanted to co-found a startup, and I just could not imagine being in Wisconsin for, a long time, like 5 years. That's a long time. Here I am 10 years later. I bought a house. I have a dog. We have a picket fence. So you know how that's going. But after D2P, I decided not to go to the startup. So I applied to an internship at a local accelerator called Generator. That is Wisconsin's largest startup accelerator. It is top ranked in the nation. And in my interview and my reach out, I had to convince them why I, as a PhD with zero business experience, should get a position that typically goes to like MBAs, law students, and like marketing students. I convinced them enough that they were interested. I went and I worked at GBeta and Generator as an intern for 3 months. And that 3-month internship was a long, very long pitch where I essentially had to convince them that I was valuable enough that even though I didn't know what specific next opportunity I was seeking, I wanted to do something more in startups. So the whole time, that trial basis was me pitching to them about how I am valuable enough that they should teach me what I don't know, so I can continue to add value back to them. During Generator, when I was working there, I engaged more with Wharf. My boss now at Wharf, Greg Keenan, really liked the work that I was doing because it was centered so much on pitching. So he asked me to come help him teach scientists how to pitch. So it all comes down to I taught scientists how to talk about their research in an intentional way. I taught scientists how to think about what are the next steps. And I did that at Generator. I finished my PhD and now I do it at Wharf. And then I talked to a couple of investors, and then, that connection with the investors ended up getting me the second contract with the family office. So all of that, again, the intention is, I don't know what the next opportunity is, but maybe you might be interested in giving it to me. Let me be very intentional in what I communicate, how I communicate, and what my next step goal is, and with the hope that you will continue to engage with me. So that's pretty much what I did to get to where I am, how I use pitching to get to where I am. So now what I do on a day-to-day basis is I help professors bring the technology to market through either a startup or licensing to a big company. I make investments to startup worldwide. Long story long, I went from PhD to venture capital, and I do it all using pitching at every single pivotal point in my career to get onto the next opportunity. So what can you do to think about pitching more effectively? So to get started, there are Oh, I'm so sorry. Yep. To get started, there are 4 things that you should start thinking about. This is sort of like the brainstorming session before you actually create your pitch. First, think about the intention. This is your ask. What do you want the outcome of this conversation or this communication effort to be? Be intentional. Start with the intention first. And then the next step is think about who your audience is. Research their background and interest. Researching the background and interest will help you figure out what to ask. Because if you're trying to ask somebody for a next conversation and that's just not who they are, maybe they're more willing to write you a check instead of give you a conversation. Then you have to know what their tendencies, what their behaviors, what their interests are. And then it also helps you figure out what to say and how to convey what you're saying. Sally mentioned, are you talking to a scientific audience? Are you talking to a general audience? Research what who you're talking to so you know how to convey the information that you need to convey. And then third is think about what you need to say to convince them to have a next engagement. Your goal in pitching is never about to close that deal then. I have never, ever gone into, and literally never, ever gone into a startup meeting where I'm like, I'm going to get you to write me a check as soon as I walk out. That does not happen. That doesn't even happen on Shark Tank. What actually ends up happening is I'm there to pitch to see if you want me to continue to pitch to you next time so you can ask me more questions about the stuff I didn't get to tell you in this first meeting. So it's all about that next engagement. That's your goal. Get the next engagement so that you can continue to build that relationship with them. And then finally, brainstorm about the format. Is it a meeting? Is it in person? Is it a presentation through Zoom? Is it formal? Is it informal? All of that really helps you figure out how to prepare a pitch. So let's talk about, now that you've got your brainstorm material, what do you need to actually do to format it so that you can actually effectively convey that material into a format that is an intentional communication, intentional conversation. As a rule, I think every single person should have 3 different types of pitch formats prepared, and these pitches should be edited and iterated throughout your entire life. The first format is a one-sentence personal intro, and that should be, 10-ish words or so. This is your personal elevator pitch about who you are as a person. For example, I'm Nee. I'm a Vietnamese American millennial who's obsessed with her dog. That's my personal one-sentence intro. If you should also have a one-sentence professional intro. This is your professional elevator pitch. For example, if you're stuck in an elevator with somebody who's a professor in your department, you can say, I'm Nee. I invest in science-heavy startups. And then finally, the third type of pitch every single person should have is a 5-minute professional pitch. This is a pitch that you would typically bring into a conversation where the intention is you give that quick teaser into what you are working on to set the stage for the rest of that meeting. So for example, if you are a PhD student having a one-on-one meeting with a PhD advisor, a 5-minute intro should look like, here's the summary and the major conclusions of the data that you have been able to generate this last week or these last 2 weeks. And that's just enough to catch up your advisor so that she or he can help you start thinking about, what to deep dive into. It gives a teaser enough as a bounce off point for them to continue that rest of the conversation. So here's the step-by-step guide for preparing your pitch from researching the content to the delivery. 1, to prepare your pitch, start with researching your audience to see if they're a good fit for your intention and your ask. 2, write a pitch transcript. This is literally every single word, uhs, all of that you want to communicate. And then I'm actually reading from a pitch transcript right now. After the transcript, find supporting visuals that really emphasize the key points that you want to highlight. So the reason why you always start with the pitch transcript first, and then you find the supporting visuals is that you don't want to start with the visuals and have the visuals dictate what you have to say in order to explain why you use that visual. It's like if you're presenting to your lab, sometimes we fall into the trap of putting the data graph first, and then you're like, oh, okay, what about this data do I really want to talk about? And that's not an effective way to communicate the conclusion of data. The most effective way to prepare a data slide for a presentation is to put the conclusion that you want to really highlight first, and then put the supporting data that help you dictate that conclusion. And then finally, practice your delivery. Now, there are 3 verbal pitching tips I have. One is think about speaking rate. The average person speaks at like 120 to 160 words per minute. If you know the time limit, you can think about how many words you need in your pitch transcript. You write the transcript down and voila, it's already in the speaking rate that you need to be speaking in order to get what you need to get conveyed. After you write transcript, practice it. See if you can repeat the transcript without directly reading from it. And the thoughts that you can recall from top of mind, those are the major highlight points that you need to use to highlight and through the use of visuals. Then you get the visuals, and then for visuals, it can be pictures or words. If you use words, go by with a what's called a 1 by 6 by 6 rule. So that means it's one thought per line, no more than 6 words per line, and no more than 6 lines per slide. 1 by 6 by 6. And then finally, think of inflection and tone when you're pitching. Avoid inflecting up at the end of your sentences because it comes off as a question instead of a fact. One thing that we know about looking at men and women and how men and women speak differently is that sometimes younger women earlier in their careers, we tend to talk as though we are conveying information uncertainly. So when we say, this is my research, when I say it like that, it comes off as though I don't actually know if it's my research, but maybe you will tell me that it's my research because I have imposter syndrome. Even if you have imposter syndrome, make sure that you are not inflecting up at the end of your sentence. It's the easiest way to convey confidence, and it's easiest way to convey that you are talking as though you are presenting a fact, even if you're uncertain about it. So that's about it. That's everything you need to know about pitching. And again, my name is Nee. If you have any questions at all, I am so more than happy to chat with you. Please feel free to reach out via LinkedIn. And I apologize, I just skipped ahead of the slide there. Please feel free to reach out via LinkedIn. And I and all my colleagues at WRF are happy to chat with you at any given time.
Excellent. Thanks, Nee. And our final panelist for the day, saving the best to last, right? That's the way this works. We're going to have Mariel Mohns tell us about social media and her role at Mortgage.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Sally and Nee. So talking about speaking rate, I'm going to try and cram a lot of information into this final segment, but I just get so excited about social media. And as a scientist by training, I also get really excited about data. So I have some data to present you as well. But essentially, we've built a foundation for solid writing, as Sally talked about. And Nee just covered how to essentially talk to anybody you meet about your science and about yourself. So how do we translate that to a digital platform through social media? And why is social media an important tool for scientists? Social media is just a constant stream of information that provides little glimpses into our lives and what we're passionate about. So as scientists, this makes it a very useful tool to help you communicate your science to a variety of audiences, whether it be the general public, people that are interested in science, your colleagues, other scientists in your field, or other scientists that are not in your field. Social media can also connect you to journalists and the media who may be interested in reporting on your research. And it can also connect you to lawmakers and those who are responsible for creating science policy. Social media is also a tool for networking. You can find collaborations or job opportunities. And I think social media is a lot of fun. So you might be thinking all of that is great, but how can social media actually help me be a better scientist and actually help me land a job? So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit of my story and how social media 100% led me to where I am today. So as a true millennial, and probably like many of you, I have been using social media for most of my adult life. I was on Facebook when it was just for college students to connect, was an early user of Twitter, and I was also a blogger. I was on Blogspot or Blogger and part of the blogging community. And that will be important in a little bit because that's actually how I ended up developing my first clips to use to start establishing a science writing career. And little did I know that these were actually seeds that would flourish into a science communication career. So as Beth mentioned, I have a background in studying immune responses to viral pathogens. I worked with David O'Connor's lab at the University of Wisconsin, where we focused on HIV research. And then a couple years into my time there, we pivoted to working on Zika virus. Now, Zika virus was a relatively unknown pathogen at the time. And so my PI decided that all of the experiments that we did, we would release all of that data in real time. His rationale was that we would be sharing and disseminating that important scientific information to hopefully expedite and advance the scientific knowledge for this relatively unknown virus while a pandemic was happening. If you think about it, that sounds kind of similar to what happened in this past year and is still happening. So during that time and my time in the O'Connor lab, I really started to get a little taste of science communication and how social media can actually advance science. Dave knew this, and so he put a lot of faith in me and gave me a great opportunity to actually manage the web portal where we uploaded all of our data and to run the lab's Twitter account and to share all of our findings on Twitter. And so that was my first taste at seeing how much of an impact social media could make in the sciences. And during this time as well, I also was looking for freelance science writing opportunities. I loved working at the bench, but I knew that I wanted to go into a career towards science writing. And by sheer luck or just by networking, I stumbled across a tweet for an educational YouTube series called SciShow. And they were looking for freelance science writers to draft scripts for them for their videos. And so I applied with really no background in science writing other than those pieces that I had drafted on my personal blog for my personal use, for my friends and family. And they liked my writing and offered me a contract. So I had the opportunity to write on all sorts of interesting topics and research things that aren't in my wheelhouse and learn how to translate that into a very specific tone for a YouTube video. And throughout this time, I ended up finding a full-time position as a science writer at Promega Corporation. So I left the O'Connor lab and transitioned into the biotech world. And this really gave me a lot of opportunity to hone my science writing, to hone my technical editing, and then also learn a little bit more about social media management and marketing, as well as corporate branding. And about a year into my job, I ended up stumbling upon a job posting for what looked like my dream science communication position. It ends up being this position that I'm in right now as a communication specialist at Mortgage. And lo and behold, I found out about this job through social media. It was actually a Facebook group for science writers. So if there's one thing that I've learned from being a part of the science communication community, it's that everyone's journey is different. We all take these weird, rambly paths to get to where we are. And sometimes you just need to go with the flow and see how those dots might connect. Now, if my story doesn't convince you of the importance of social media, then maybe some hard statistics will, because like it or not, social media is a major part of our world. It's not only for connecting friends and family, but it's a major source of news and trending topics. Of course, with the coronavirus and this pandemic, social media has completely blown up. As of January 2021, over 3.6 billion people use social media for an average of 144 minutes each day. That's active users. And you can see here some of the active users for the more popular social media platforms out there. And what I'm going to do is give you a general overview and some case study examples as to how one might use each platform. I'm not saying that it's the exact way that you have to communicate on them, but it's an example. With the exception of TikTok, you'll see that asterisk there. Though I do actually have a few comments about the meteoric rise of that video sharing app. So I'm going to start by talking about TikTok. The main audience is Gen Z. And the reason why I'm not going to dive deeply into this is because Gen Z isn't necessarily the audience that many of you are looking to reach if you're using social media to advance your career. But there actually is a lot of potential there, and it could be a really fun way to exercise your SciComm skills by taking a complex topic and disseminating it into for a specific audience, all within a 20 to 30 second video time frame. You can think about it as an elevator pitch for Gen Z. And there are actually scientists who are using this platform in really unique ways. Some of them do comedic skits, like what's life like as a grad student. Some of them bandwagon onto the latest dance trends. Some people do lab demonstrations of experiments that you can do at home. And then there are short, quick explainer videos too. So it's a really rapidly evolving way of adapting SciComm for a much younger audience. But on the flip side, for adults, Facebook is still the primary social media platform. And a Pew Research study in 2019 demonstrated that 69% of adults in the US use Facebook as their primary social media platform. Now, I think this probably has changed quite a bit, especially given the scope of the pandemic and how people are at home and people are on social media looking for information. But the audience essentially on Facebook, if you're using it for a for a science communication tool, your audience is likely your peers and your family, your parents, maybe even your grandparents. And there's a strong focus on community. Comments on Facebook are really the primary engagement driver, which could be a good thing or could be a bad thing. And I think Facebook also offers the opportunity to have more long form style content. Now, it's not long form in the traditional journalism sense, but long form in the context of social media. And so one example that I want to share here is this Facebook page called Dear Pandemic, which is actually a volunteer collective of researchers and clinicians, all women. Some of them are from UW, with expertise in epidemiology, health policy, nursing, mental health. And at the start of the pandemic, they saw that there was a lot of misconceptions about what was happening, and they wanted to provide some clear answers to people's questions. So they began writing these explainer posts about COVID-19 in the style of Dear Abby Q&A. Since they started their page, they've gained over 70,000 followers in the past year. And while that's an organized group, I feel like any individual can essentially do the same thing. With your field of research, you can take a complex science topic and you can explain it to your non-scientist friends and followers. Give it a try and see how it goes. And it could be a fun exercise. Now, Instagram is all about the visual. It's all about photos, videos. It skews a little bit younger, millennials, Gen Z. And so if you think about it, your peers and students, whether they be grad students, postdocs, or even younger students, high schoolers, they're your primary audience if you're using this as a SciComm tool. And it can really be a way to offer an inside look into your life as a scientist and showcase the human side of science. So the example that I have here is a neurologist named Samantha Yamin, and she blew up on Instagram a few years ago because there was an op-ed in the publication Science that argued, quote, "Time spent on Instagram is time away from research." And the author specifically called out female scientists, specifically Sam, for snapping too many selfies. So obviously in response, she argued, no, selfies actually benefit science. And so she created an online movement called #ScientistsWhoSelfie and encouraged scientists to take pictures of themselves in the lab, doing hobbies, in the field, if they're field scientists. And they curated all of those photos that were marked with that hashtag And she collected the data and she co-authored a paper that demonstrated that selfies actually help humanize science and build public trust in science. So it's a very, very important way of connecting with non-scientists. And another really cool thing about Instagram is there's a feature called Instagram Stories, which capture a brief moment in time. It can be really casual. The posts go away after 24 hours unless you choose to save them. So here's Sam. It was a video, but this is just a screenshot. And I don't know if you can read the little caption, but she's griping about reading the news about COVID cases in her province. And she has little rage flames on her face. So Instagram can be really casual and just really a way to connect on a personal level with your audiences. Now, Twitter, I feel like I could do an entire talk on Twitter, but I'm going to try and keep it brief. So Twitter is actually the social media platform that's not used by as many people, but for some reason, it's really popular with scientists. About 32% have at least a college education or higher. It's just become a really cool way to connect with colleagues and then also with the general public who's interested in science. One thing to note is that journalism Twitter is another niche group that is very active on Twitter. And so it's really common nowadays for journalists to find sources through Twitter, and they'll direct message a scientist and ask if they can interview them. Or, as we've all probably noted in the past few years, it's really common for a tweet to be screenshotted and quoted in the press and memorialized forever in a news story. Hopefully we don't see as many of those in the next 4 years. Twitter has a strong focus on community and networking. Users can tag other users to get their attention. Replies and retweets can generate conversation. But unlike Facebook, these tweets are limited to 280 characters. So you need to be able to communicate succinctly and get your point across very briefly. Another thing about Twitter is that there's this constant stream of content all day. So if you only check a couple times, you're likely to miss a lot. And that's where the hashtag really comes into play. Nowadays, hashtags can be purely informational. A lot of academic conferences use hashtags so that people can follow along, even if they're not in attendance. So you see this example here from the AAAS meeting recently. Or hashtags can be a fun science communication opportunity. This herpetologist, Erin McGee, created a Twitter game called #FindThatLizard, where she posts photos that she's taken in the fields and asks Twitter followers to reply or direct message her and see if they can find the lizard in the photo. And it's just a really neat way to get people to engage with science in a creative way. All right, so LinkedIn is probably the most straightforward, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. It has a very clear-cut purpose for professional networking. Your audience on LinkedIn is likely to be your peers, colleagues, and potential employers. But the thing that I want to get across here is that your LinkedIn profile is not just a carbon copy of your resume. It can be much more dynamic. Keywords are searchable on there, so you really want to build a profile that will engage and grab the attention of potential employers. So my example here, my colleague Gabriella at the Morgridge Institute, she has training as a geologist, but then she transitioned to a career in nonprofit development, which is already a unique story. But to make her stand out even more on LinkedIn, she noted that she is a Guinness World Record holder for four-leaf clover hunting. So there's certainly room for individuality and things that can set you apart that you normally wouldn't include on a resume. So as you think about using social media and you're thinking about branding yourself and how to present yourself online, some people choose to just use a personal account, little glimpses of their life as well as their work. Some people have a strictly science professional account. Some people just want to work under a pseudonym. And there's no clear-cut answer. You need to kind of just determine your own comfort level with how you want to blend the personal and the professional. But I think a couple things that are just really great to do on all of your social media bios: add a disclaimer, just say your opinions are your own, not that of your employer. And then also to use your bio and craft it in a way that is essentially an elevator pitch for yourself, for who you are on social media. And remember that social media is dynamic, constantly changing, so you can experiment with different things. And to close, just a few more tips and advice before you publish that post. First, keep it simple. Think about Sally's writing tips, how to know your audience and know the platform that you're using. Probably the most important thing online is don't feed the trolls. We've talked a lot about engagement and wanting to connect with people, but sometimes it's just not worth it. You want to really try and educate someone, but it's not worth it to feed the trolls. It's not worth your time and your mental health, so don't do it. Only take what you can manage. You don't have to be on every platform. You don't have to use every platform for science communication. Find what works for you. I know that I personally can't use Facebook for SciComm anymore. I've tried and it got too heated in the comments. So from now on, I just science on Twitter. That's my jam. And finally, I want you to remember that you're an advocate for science, but science and your work isn't the only thing that defines you. So being personable and individual online goes a long way for representation in the sciences, and it shows the human side of science, which can help make science more accessible for others. So just be yourself, be genuine, and be kind. And that's all I have. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. You can find me on social media at Mariel Mohns, pretty much everywhere, or email me. And feel free to follow the Mortgage institutional accounts as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you to all the panelists. And we have a few questions in the comments, so we're going to go through those questions as quickly as we can. We've got a few minutes left. And I will just tell the audience and really stress that we're all happy to talk to anybody at any time about our careers, about WARF, about the Mortgage Institute. Feel free to reach out. Our contact information should be available online. It's available on the slides. Reach out and ask us questions. We're happy to answer them and talk to you offline too. So a couple of questions popped up during Nee's talk. One was, which startup had the most impact on you, Nee? Is there one that you can kind of comes to mind?
Yeah, so you would think that it would be STEM Farm, the one that I spun out with my advisor. It is not. I distinctly remember, I will always give this example. There's a startup that I met that essentially told me I know nothing. I know nothing about anything, and I need to really go out and really talk to industry and talk to the market, because it doesn't matter what your personal biases are about a technology or a market opportunity, the market really knows best. So when I was at Generator, I got so tired of seeing people pitch dog walking apps. I was like, dog walking apps are the dumbest thing. And at that point, I didn't have a dog. Now I would pay so much money. I would spend so much money on a dog walking app. But at the time, I thought dog walking apps are so dumb. And if I ever saw another one, I would be so mad. I went to Atlanta for a meeting and I met a dog walking app company that was making $2.5 million a month. So you don't know anything. Nobody knows anything. The only thing that can tell you whether something is going to be successful in the market is the market itself. So that is probably the one that and now I spend a lot of time talking to industry. Probably my boss, Greg Keenan, he probably gets really angry because I spend way too much time trying to get too much data.
So there was another question thanks, Nee. There was another question that came in for Nee, and I'm going to kind of open it up to the entire panel a bit, because it's about internships and pitching your value. So your internship would teach you what you didn't know that you didn't know. So you can, in the case of Nee, work with startups. In the case, Sally, you mentioned you had an internship as well. Mariel, you had your job coming out. What were things that you pitched to get you more information, kind of get you learning a little bit more, if you've got any examples of that?
I will let Sally take this because I feel like I spent a lot of time talking already.
Is the question asking how did I get my internships, or what did I learn from my internships?
I think it's how the question, I'll read it right up to you. Can you give an example of how you pitched your value so your internship would teach you what you didn't know that you didn't know, so you could continue with startups? So how you pitched yourself to get your internship, and then when you're in your internship, how did you pull out learning opportunities? I think that's how I'm reading it, is what did you do to make sure you were getting the learning opportunities in your internship so you could learn the scope of what you're doing?
I would say in science writing, lead with humility. I have never encountered a scientist who is ever resentful of me asking questions. And when you're a young writer or a research communicator, no one expects you to know how to do this right away. You'll find many mentors if you open your heart and your mind to what they have to teach you. I certainly thought I was a great writer when I applied and landed my internships. I thought I was the best writer in the world. And then I quickly learned I was the worst in the entire department. And that's just a learning curve everybody in our profession moves through. It's a journey. And I've been in this field 10 years and I'm still learning every day. So embrace those learning opportunities and lead with humility.
So I'm going to just break in here before any of the other panelists answer. I notice now we are at our 5 o'clock end time. So I think, are the panelists okay with staying, say 5 minutes longer just to run through these questions? And if other people have questions, we can handle those as well. I will just make a quick pitch, since that seems to be one of the themes for our session today, is keep your eyes open, audience members, for the next essential topics in this series. It's going to be on March 3rd, and you'll get to learn a little bit of my role, in a way, intellectual property, and how you can get into that as a career and what that means in technology transfer. So it'll prove to be a really interesting topic as well. I'm going to move us back now, panelists, to the question, learning opportunities. I mean, Sally, that was a great answer. I really think that's great advice. Again, regardless of what career you're going to end up going into, there are certain skills that you can foster and build, and I think that's a great one, regardless of what your career goals are. Mariel, anything you wanted to add to that? We can.
Yeah. So, I never know what the next opportunity is going to look like. I'm always chasing learning opportunities because the best thing you can learn is what you don't know. Because if you already know it, you can Google it. I mean, Google is out there. You can learn as much as you want. But if you don't even know to Google it, you're never going to be able to learn it. So the way that I approach that is pretty much, as Sally said, approach it with humility. Just admit when you don't know something. You'll often, if you ever meet with me, you'll often hear, I'll say something and I'm like, I don't even know if that's the right question to ask. So the way in which I was able to convey that sense of teach me what I don't know is to come in knowing my why and being really hungry. Knowing my why for me was that I wanted to help contribute to the field of science, but I didn't know how to do it. I just know that there are certain things I really enjoy, certain things I do really well. So if you see things that I could really do to help in that field, please let me know. I'm hungry and I'm always looking to learn. And that's it. That's everything I say to pretty much everybody I meet.
Mariel, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just third that being hungry for a learning opportunity and being willing to jump in and do the work, even if you don't know what the experience is going to be, putting yourself out there and just trying new things is how you're going to develop those new skills that you didn't know in the first place.
That's a great point. And it reminds me back, I mean, when I was finishing up my PhD and knew I wasn't going to be a bench scientist, the scariest thing for me was getting away from the bench, even though I knew I wasn't going to be a bench scientist. And it's just the unknown and taking that chance. And I think all the panelists today had that opportunity where you're taking a chance. And I want to stress to the audience members as well, I don't know of any instance where you take that chance and if you figure out this isn't for you, you're stuck. I mean, you can find other opportunities. You just have to have the courage to ask the questions, to make the right connections, and to take those chances and learn whatever you can out of the opportunities. Because again, you're building skills, and regardless of what your dream job is, you'll get there ultimately. It's just building those skills and taking that meandering path.
Yeah, Beth, I couldn't agree more. Through the market discovery and talking to industry to understand what industry wants, it's often, people think, oh, I just need people to confirm that what I'm doing is right. But it's not about that. Sometimes the most valuable thing is somebody says, don't pursue it. Stop doing it right now. Because then you can move on. You can move on from that opportunity. It's as much an elimination process as a confirmation process.
Sure. So we've got a question for the panel. If you could share any instance where you had a communications mishap and how you fixed it, or what lessons did you learn from that mishap? So anybody want to share some mishaps?
I'll start. I advanced through my slide today too fast, and then I just pretended it didn't happen. I just kept going.
Very good, Nee. Very good. Seamless.
Yeah, I think I hinted at the fact that I don't talk about science as much on Facebook anymore, and because it got me into a little bit of a sticky situation with a family member, and things just started escalating very quickly, and I didn't really know how to course correct. And so for me, in that instance, and with social media, it's really easy to just step back and say, you know what, thank you for the discussion, but like I'm done, I'm out, and just step away from the keyboard. I think it's far too easy for people to hide behind the keyboard and to use it as a crutch for just saying whatever they want to say. And so you can often take the higher road to take a step back and just say, thank you for your time and for the discussion, but I don't want to pursue this any longer. And that's how I solved that mishap.
Yeah, I mean, you make mistakes every single day. None of us on this panel will claim we don't. Like I said, I've never once gotten any negative feedback about asking questions of scientists, and that's what makes our job so exciting, is that you get to interface with people that are learning new things and making discoveries every day. Now, that said, there is a political side to science and science communications that I learned the hard way when I wrote a story and I focused on the grad student's contribution to an invention. And the PI was not too pleased with me because she felt I had underrepresented her contribution. And, you know, there are politics in the lab, we all know that, but I think getting us all back together and understanding just what everybody contributed and that everybody had made vital progress in this work, we patched things up pretty quick, and it ended on a good note.
It's a good story too. Yeah, no, everyone makes mistakes. I think that's a great point. Apologizing isn't such a bad idea in many instances. That also goes a long way. Most people are very happy to take your apologies. So it's a great point. All right, another question. Someone is asking for advice for talking personally on social media about your professional work when one isn't an official representative of their employer. So I know personally, I mean, I have social media accounts. I honestly don't use them from a professional standpoint. They are just my personal accounts. And I've always wondered about that personal, professional melding kind of overlap and how you manage that. Is it manageable? Do you just create 2 accounts for everything and say, okay, my personal one, I'm going to keep separate from how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I kind of hinted at this in my branding slide, and there really is no clear-cut answer. It's different for every person, and that comfort level is different. I know for me personally, before I was in charge of any institutional accounts or managing any accounts, I would tweet about my professional work on my personal account and be fine with it. But I know some people wouldn't be comfortable doing that. I know there's examples too of people who are very open about things like mental health issues, and especially as a grad student, how that impacts them. And trying to navigate, like, is it okay that I'm tweeting about this? Is this going to affect my prospects at landing a job after graduating? And there's actually one woman that I know of, her name is Susanna Harris, and she ended up developing a whole Twitter community around mental health and supporting grad students because she was open to talk about it. And so it's really just about finding your comfort level and knowing what you can do. I mean, one thing you can do is you can ask your institution if they have a social media policy or if they have guidelines that could help you kind of navigate, is it okay if I talk about this stuff? But otherwise, you just need to figure out what's right for you. There's no right or wrong answer.
It's a good answer. So do you think an organization could take some ownership as well as educating their employees on these things? I mean, I think that's something I've never really given it much thought, but maybe there's a role for them to be more proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, a lot of places do media training. And so, you know, it's a way to coach people on how to talk with the media and how to talk with journalists. And I think now more than ever, as I alluded to in my talk, there is a lot of crossover with journalism and with how we use social media. And so that's a very natural way in how to provide some guidelines for your scientists and for your employees on how to navigate the digital space.
That's helpful. Yeah, at WRF, we're pretty spoiled because we've got a great communications team. So before I step into any minefield, I can kind of run things by them and say, okay, what am I missing here? And is this something that seems okay? And I do that on occasion. All right, one other question was in the chat. It's a question, social media is a great way to connect, educate, and share expertise. How is the spread of non-peer-reviewed articles impacting science and social media as a trusted resource? Wow, can I just say bioarchives, med archives, I knew very little about them until this last year. Wow. What's going on? How's that impacting things?
That's a big question. My computer battery might die here, so hopefully it doesn't while I'm talking. But with the Zika virus research that we were doing, and when we shared all of our data, essentially, you know, pre-peer review, there was some potential concern that might influence our prospects at being able to actually publish in the journals and, you know, getting that information out there. Could that backfire on us? And it didn't. I don't know if that was just luck or if that's just the scope of communicating science results right now. If there is a need to kind of transform the publication process, I know there's, you know, conversations both ways, pro and con for preprints. And whose responsibility is it? Is it the scientist's responsibility to say, hey, this is just a preprint? Is it the journalist's responsibility to not report on that? It's kind of this tricky, I feel like we're at the cusp of how to navigate those communications issues and the way that we build trust in science and have the peer review process still maintain its integrity. So that's a big question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. Sally, I was interested in kind of what you think about this, just because you had pointed out on your slide on the bell curve book. And again, I think the peer review process has, at least as a scientist, old school scientist, I will say, I'm the old school scientist Luddite of social media. Yeah, I've got that Facebook account. I'm one of those people. No, Instagram, I have Facebook, but I'm used to peer review. I'm used to that being the backstop of, okay, someone posted this out there, but it's gone through review process. So the quality of it is such. If we aren't having that peer review, is there a concern around the quality, or what do you think?
I don't know. It's a hard question. And the question that I would answer that with another question, which is how has COVID changed this going forward? Because the pace at which results have been published in preprints is unprecedented. And I wonder if that's going to habituate us going forward with our expectations of results and data in real time. So I don't know, Beth, I think that's a really good question. It's a really good question, and I don't have an answer.
Nee, do you have the answer? I'm going to end it with you because I think we're going to wrap this up. We're coming up to quarter after, so I'll give you the last take on this, Nee, good or bad?
I think social media it's a great way for scientists to figure out how to disseminate the information they publish through peer review and actually make it one, easy to understand and accessible. The thing about a lot of peer review publications is that science is only available for people who can afford to pay and subscribe to it. And I think that social media, I'm going to use a word that everyone hates, social media is democratizing our access to science and science information. Now, caveat is, given that we don't sensationalize the science and given that we don't misinterpret that science. But then that's why we have people like Sally who can help us be very accurate and also be interesting and intriguing and, you know, engaging with how we disseminate that information. And also, you know, there's lots of pictures of cats and dogs on Twitter.
There are the bonuses. There's always the good side to things. Well, thank you again, panelists. I thought it was great. The discussions were great. I thought your stories are fascinating. And for audience members who have stuck with us through this, again, feel free to reach out to us if you've got any additional questions. I really can't stress it enough. Communicating science is such a big deal. I see so many instances where someone's working on some really cool science, and me as a trained scientist, I have a hard time understanding what the science is. So I think as scientists and people who are passionate about science, we all have a role to play in being able to communicate science to a wide audience. And I thought you guys did a great job of giving students, postdocs, the audience, some tips on how they can better do that. So thank you again. And everyone stay tuned, March 3rd. That will be the next WARF Essential Topics. So thanks everyone, take care.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.